Hello everyone, welcome back to another Project Gladiator weather forecast. Today I'll be covering the weather for July 4th of 2023 and anything you might need to know regarding your plans for July 4th for today. So currently we do have an enhanced risk setup. However, I am recording this video before 12:30, so everything may not be as completely accurate as it is in the other forecast, as the SPC outlooks are very early today, and I am making sure to get this video out earlier than usual, so you guys can have time and know ahead before you go out and do your plans for July 4th. However, we do have an enhanced risk for today for north central Kansas into southern Nebraska, with a slight risk around that. It goes all the way up north and east, all the way up to the Michigan Peninsula Panhandle thing, through Wisconsin, Iowa, the majority of Kansas, and into parts of eastern Colorado and southeastern Wyoming, into parts of eastern Nebraska and parts of South Dakota, as well as into Minnesota. The marginal threat around that does go into Canada and goes as far west as parts of Utah and as far south as parts of New Mexico and the Oklahoma and Texas panhandles. You can see that we do have a marginal threat for the Dixie Alley area going up along the coast. I'll get into this towards the end of today's forecast, as it's not really all that much of a big deal. However, I will cover it in today's forecast towards the end. As for our threats for today, we do have a 2% tornado threat for that region that is back towards the western part of that slight risk region, for parts of Wyoming and northern Colorado. As for wind threats, we do have a 30% hatch significant for that enhanced risk region, as well as a 15% and a 5% around that. And as for the marginal threat, we do have a 5% wind threat. And then as for our hail threats, we do have a 15% with the hatch significant for southern Nebraska, which could be expanded by 12:30, but it is on top of a 15% and a 5%. And as for the marginal threat that is back towards the Dixie Alley area, there is a 5% on that, but I do not think that there should be a 5% because the overall shear is going to be pretty weak, and I'll show you why that is on the pivotal weather models. Taking a look at our pivotal weather models, you can see that we still have that shortwave trough that's making its way out of Canada, and this 500 millibars segment of the video might be a little bit longer than usual, as today is a little bit more complicated. However, to the untrained eye, it may look a little confusing, but I will show you what you need to be looking for. For near that 2% tornado threat region, where that shortwave trough is moving through, you can see a line of storms that develops out of Utah, and as it gets down to much more of a flatter and low-based region of Colorado, it has time to expand, and then you can see a much stronger mid-level flow ahead of that region. So that could lead to the possibility of some weak directional shear. However, again, I think most of this is going to be mostly speed shear. However, there is possibly some weak low-level directional shear mixed in with that too. And then as storms move out of this region, there may not be as much of a tornado threat as a weak mid-level flow does get ahead of that, and overall weak shear may not allow for the possibility of tornadoes as it moves into Nebraska and north central Kansas. However, we do have another region of development separate from those tornadic supercells that could be possible. We do have a cluster of storms that is expected to develop in that enhanced risk region. This cluster of cells doesn't look like it has all that much strong mid-level flow, so it may not have all that much of a strong tornado threat. If not a tornado threat at all, it's likely just going to be the main possibility of large hail and strong damaging winds. And then back towards the marginal threat that's further down towards the Dixie Alley, you can see that there isn't really a shortwave trough or anything moving through the region, so you may be wondering what might be the trigger for severe weather development for today, and I'll show you why that is. However, you can see that the shortwave trough that I've been covering the past few days is making its way out into the Atlantic Ocean finally. However, it may loop back around and might trigger a marginal threat for Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. It could, it might not, but it definitely has the possibility to. However, again, our main regions for the marginal threat towards the eastern coast is going to be that marginal threat and up along the coast. Again, with this shortwave trough, the reason that we do have the possibility for large hail is because of the strong mid-level flow is going to lead to the possibility of elongated photographs, which will then also lead to the possibility of diminishing our directional shear a little bit. So it may not lead to as strong of a tornado threat. However, again, the possibility of maybe one or two tornadoes, one or two brief tornadoes back towards southern Wyoming and northern Colorado could be possible. However, again, mostly the shear is going to be speed shear compared to directional shear. Taking a look at our temperatures, you may be wondering why I'm taking a look at our temperatures, because I don't really do that so often. I am planning on trying to do it more in the weekly overlooks, and I was planning on doing it last weekly overlook. I just kind of completely forgot to do it, but I'm going to take a look at the triggering factors for not only the marginal threat, but also the aiding triggering factors for the enhanced risk that is back towards the north central plains. You can see that we do have a boundary. You can see pretty clearly here. It may be a little bit hard to see with the untrained eye, but we do have a diffuse boundary that is stationary along the Dixie Alley into parts of north central Texas and Oklahoma, along the Dixie Alley and up along the coast. That is going to be the main triggering factor for severe weather development back towards the marginal threat. You can see that we do have another boundary that is making its way southeast out of Canada. This cold front is going to be another major triggering factor for that enhanced risk that is back towards Kansas and Nebraska. You can see that this is a very strong cold front here. It's very, very prominent. You can see it very clearly, even without a trained eye. So this is going to be a very prominent triggering factor for severe weather development back towards the enhanced risk region. And as this cold front makes its way southeast, it could have the possibility of triggering severe weather development by tomorrow along Oklahoma, Missouri, and Illinois, and maybe even into Chicago and Arkansas. Taking a look at our dew points for the enhanced risk region and then back towards the 2% tornado threat region, which are likely going to be separate compared to each other. You can see starting off with the tornadic supercells that could be possible in the region. We do have some weaker overall dew points compared to further out east where that enhanced risk region is. However, these dew points in the mid to upper 50s is definitely going to allow for the possibility of some moderate instability depending on our lapse rates. And then back towards the enhanced risk region, you can see that cold front there is pushing on a lot of the moisture and clumping it up all together and boosting up the dew points up to possibly the low 70s along that cold front boundary and also the upper 60s. And you can see as it gets into north central Kansas and southern Nebraska, you can see as soon as that boundary gets there, it has some fairly strong dew points on it. So and you can see storm development right there. So it is definitely again going to be a strong triggering factor for severe weather development. So overall, this is going to most likely help aid in severe weather development, if not mainly trigger it, and then also help boost up moisture and instability to help live it up to that enhanced risk name. Taking a look at our lapse rates, you can see starting off with the possibility of those tornadic supercells back in Colorado and Wyoming. You can see that we do have some kind of fluctuating lapse rates that do go kind of between the upper 8s and 9s and the 7s, and then also drop down to the 6s and weak 7s. So they are kind of fluctuating, and the drop could be associated with storm development moving through the area. So I'm going to stick with right here with lapse rates in the 8s and possibly the upper 7s and maybe the low 9s, which could be possible. With the dew points that we had, we could definitely see the possibility of some moderate instability. And then back towards the enhanced risk region, you can see that we do have some fairly strong lapse rates as well, with lapse rates in the mid 8s to upper 7s and mid 7s is definitely going to allow for the possibility of maybe some Cape values in the 3000, as well as along that frontal boundary we could see the possibility of maybe boosting up the Cape values up to the 4000s possibly. Taking a look at our instability, starting off with the possibility of a few tornadic supercells back towards Colorado and Wyoming, you can see that we do get some overall weaker and moderate instability. The instability is likely going to be back towards the 1000s, the triple digits range, possibly getting up to the 2000s in some regions. However, in the region where we do have that 2% tornado threat, it does not look like it's going to get up to that all that much. However, it could be possible, but it's likely going to stay around the upper triple digits to mid triple digits, as well as into the mid, maybe the upper 1000s. And then back towards the Tangier region, you can see along that frontal boundary, you can see the boundary right here where we have strong instability, which is being clumped up compared to everywhere else, and boosted up with that cold front there, and then pretty much no instability behind it. So you can see along that frontal boundary, we do have instability that is reaching the mid 4000s, as well as the upper 3000s and mid 3000s, as well as the widespread outside of that frontal boundary, the widespread upper 2000s and possibly the low 3000s in some regions. However, storms are likely going to develop along that cold front region, so they will be available to use the extremely strong 4000s and upper 3000s of instability, and depending on our wind shear. Again, I don't think we're going to have too strong wind shear with this clump of storms right here. If we do have a little bit of wind shear, it could possibly become tornadic, but again, I don't think we're going to have any wind shear associated with this clump in particular. However, we will have a little bit of wind shear associated with the clump back here, but because of how weak the instability is back towards the western slight risk in that 2% tornado threat region, I definitely don't think it's going to get anywhere above a 2% tornado threat because of how overall weak our instability is and how it's mostly staying around the weaker moderates, and with weak overall directional shear, I don't think we're going to have all that strong of a tornadic threat. It is again most likely going to stay around a 2% tornado threat. Outside of the tornado threats, this instability is definitely going to allow for the possibility of some really large hail, depending on our wind shear and our elongated hodographs, as well as the possibility of some strong damaging outflow gusts. Taking a look at our wind shear, let's start off with the enhanced risk region, where I was saying that we may not get all that strong wind shear, and you can see that along that frontal boundary, you can see it there in that little line here. You can see that frontal boundary here, and then where storm development will begin is somewhere in that enhanced risk region right there. So it does look like we have overall some pretty weak shear. But this shear definitely could allow for the possibility of maybe a weak 2%, maybe a tiny 2% tornado threat to develop by the time it gets to 12:30. However, I don't really think it's going to be plausible. I think a lot of this shear that you're seeing, all this extremely strong shear back towards the northwest, and where that 2% tornado threat region is definitely going to be speed shear compared to anything else. However, we may get a weak 2% tornado threat along that frontal boundary in the enhanced risk region by 12:30. It may not be all that plausible, because I think they might have put it on the 9:30 if it was really all that prominent. But again, it could be possible. It may not happen. We'll just have to wait and see by 12:30. However, if this is mostly speed shear, in which it probably is, we are going to see the possibility of some elongated hodographs, which will allow for the possibility of some large hail developing back in the enhanced risk region, as well as maybe the possibility of some small and medium-sized hail along the frontal boundary where storms develop, and all the way up through Minnesota in that slight risk region, and back towards the tornadic supercells that could be possible further out east. Taking a look at our dew points for the marginal threat that is back towards the Dixie Alley, you can see that we do have some fairly strong dew points, which is expected this time of year in this particular region, with dew points along that front that is getting up to possibly the mid-70s, maybe the weak upper 70s, but it is likely going to stay around the mid-70s depending on our lapse rates. We could see the possibility of some pretty strong instability with this. Taking a look at our lapse rates, you can see that we do have some fairly overall very weak lapse rates. We do have lapse rates that don't look like they're going to improve back towards the Dixie Alley. However, there could be some spots of the 6,000s, and then also this batch right here that could get up to maybe the upper sixes. However, with these overall very weak lapse rates, we could see the possibility of some weaker overall cape compared to what would typically be possible with moisture like that and dew points that are that high. But with overall weak lapse rates, we could see the possibility of cape values that range from the upper 2000s to 2500s and possibly the mid 3000s, probably not the 4000s. Taking a look at our instability, you can see that we do get pretty much that. You can see further out east a little bit, we do have some much stronger instability compared to around the Dixie Alley up along the coast. That could lead to the possibility of maybe some a little bit more explosive storms. However, overall it should be pretty much the same. With instability like this and overall weak lapse rates, we could see the possibility of mainly some small isolated hail with weak shear and weak lapse rates with this instability, as well as the possibility of some strong damaging outflow gusts. However, it does look like that mainly there isn't going to be a tornado threat because of overall weak shear and no mid-level flow. However, again, the possibility of some isolated small hail could be possible, as well as with the possibility of some strong damaging outflow gusts. Taking a look at our wind shear for the Dixie Alley marginal threat, I do want to touch on this a little bit, even though we aren't expecting overall strong shear or pretty much no shear at all. I just wanted to show you guys how there is going to be pretty much no shear. You can see after storms develop along that frontal boundary, you can see a little bit of weak wind shear in the wake of a storm development. However, again, it's going to be in the wake of storm development, especially with this clump of overall pretty weak wind shear towards northern Alabama. Again, it's going to be in the wake of storm development, so it's likely not going to be tornadic. Again, weak wind shear is going to allow for the possibility maybe some small hail with the possibility of those weak lapse rates and strong cape values. Again, there is not going to be any tornado threat with today's marginal threat back towards the Dixie Alley region. Now that I've told you the weather, please go down to the description and check out the socials for Project Gladiator and join the Discord for any updates on Project Gladiator. And I hope that this helped with any July 4th plans for today with going out with friends and family. If you live in any of the areas I covered, please stay weather alert if you're out and about for July 4th, as some storms could pose a risk to you or your family. So make sure you're staying weather alert for this July 4th if you live in any of the areas that I covered. And hopefully I will be able to see you guys tomorrow with another forecast.